Many Australians, most of them probably, were sure that what they did out of the line, what they would have called off the job, was their concern. Not the army's, but their concern. And a soldier of the time wrote this: "Discipline irks him," talking about the Australian soldier generally. "He is not used to it, and it's a thing he can never be made to understand. Every man considers himself the equal of every other man. It's not in his program to take peremptory orders, but he looks upon a request almost as a command." Significant, isn't it? Because they were civilian soldiers. They were civilians who'd gone off to do a job for somebody. They're doing a favour to Britain, to the old country, to home. And they weren't going to be buggered about, as they would have put it, out of the line. They put it like that and more forcefully many times. The English assessment that Australians were good fighters in the line but bad soldiers out of it would have been seen by the AIF as a virtue. That was not a criticism. This was the way it ought to be. And there's a letter from a digger which says, he's quoting an incident, you'll get the point. "We heard a fairy voice say, 'Hey, you men, why don't you salute?' We told him we were Australians." But the officer said he didn't care who we were. We would have to salute before we passed that way. So we said we'd go another way. We went nearly half a mile rather than salute him. And yet, Australians by reputation, and probably in fact, were among those most willing to kill. Truly, they were maybe even the most willing to kill. Unless you take the French colonial troops, which was more ruthless. They had a very straightforward attitude to the Hun, and this was conditioned largely by propaganda. And they hated him with a loathing quite unparalleled, except again perhaps by some colonial troops. And many, it has to be said, killed their opponents brutally and quite unnecessarily. Now, these men were tough. They were very tough, many of them. Some of the most famous of them has been portrayed as delicate aesthetic visionaries. And I'm thinking especially of John Simpson Kirkpatrick, the AIF's most famous man at Gallipoli. Now, in fact, John Simpson Kirkpatrick was a boozer and a brawler, and he was straight out of a ship's engine room. He was tough. He was so tough that when he saw the water reddening with men falling in it on 25th of April 1915, he said, "To hell with the unit." He walked straight through, plowed straight through the water, waded through it, straight up the hill, and he appointed himself a one-man unit with a donkey for bringing the wounded back. And he was killed doing it on the 25th of May, just a month later. He's so famous that when the Australian finally, in 1965, produced a Gallipoli medallion, there's Simpson with his donkey on the medallion. And of course Australia and the Southern Cross on the reverse. But that's how famous he is. But this man was tough. But never let it be forgotten, he wasn't a delicate, sensitive man. He knew what he was going to do, and he did it regardless of the risk. So, just to set the record straight, I don't like to see people made out to be what they're not. And John Simpson Kirkpatrick wasn't one of life's drawing room heroes. Private Bill Corey of the 55th Battalion was another one. The only man in the British Commonwealth, British Imperial Forces to win the military medal 4 times. And he won it on all 4 times, all 4 occasions, as a stretcher bearer. He was a tough lad. He survived the war, too, amazingly. Well, you know what stretcher bearers had to do, and the conditions under which they worked, and the risks they took. And that was his professional life during World War I. And his record establishes, surely, what he was like. Now, this is, in fact, a good point to talk about Australian leadership at junior and at senior level. In the AIF, there was no such thing as an officer corps or an officer class. Important to remember. the Royal Military College at Duntroon had provided officers for the Australian Regular Army, but it was very small. Now, these young officers did very well, but nearly all the senior officers, above brigadier and above, had been in the militia. But all the junior officers came up from the ranks. The rank and file simply didn't trust an officer unless he'd had this kind of experience. He had to win their respect. And some men never succeeded even in deferring to AIF officers, men who'd come up from the ranks. Or even senior officers. Monash had to reprimand his men on several occasions. He complained that men kept their pipes in their mouths, or stood easy while superiors addressed them. They even played cards on sentry duty. Because as one soldier explained to him very patiently, he was never more alert than when he was playing cards. Just after one of these patrols had come back, an AIF officer, I remember an officer, warned his men as an inspecting brigadier approached. And this is often quoted as apocryphal, but it really isn't. I do know the source of it. And he said, "Here he comes," because they're expecting him. See? "Here he comes. Now, boys, no coughing, no spitting, and for Christ's sake, don't call me Alf." I can imagine a lot of versions of that throughout the war, because there was this kind of familiarity that just wasn't copied in other armies. Again, for the simple fact that Alf had been one of the boys once. But the boys, incidentally, didn't try to exploit that. Once a man had won their respect as an officer, they didn't try to take advantage of the fact that he'd once been a private soldier. It didn't happen in that war, and the same system of leadership, more or less, applied in World War II, and they didn't then. What Australians expected from their officers was that great old Australian proverbial requirement, a fair go. A fair go is possibly the most heard or most frequently used phrase in the Australian Army. "Oh, give us a fair go, Corp," or "give us a fair go, Sarge," or "give us a fair go, sir," or whatever. They didn't like being put upon. They wanted something reasonable. They didn't mind what it was, provided it was reasonable. But if it didn't seem reasonable, they'd say, "Oh, give us a fair go." And they would, nevertheless, even if the terms weren't changed, they'd still go and do what they were asked. But this... Now, early in 1919, two Australian lieutenants stood in a line of men at Buckingham Palace. This was an investiture, and the king had been delayed, and these two chaps were restless. And one of them said loudly, "George is late on parade, we'll have to crime him." And he said it quite loudly. Now this was Joe Maxwell, who'd come to receive his Victoria Cross, and his mate was E.W. Matner, who already had an MC and bar. So after the king had given them, they were together, of course, the VCs, they chatted for a few minutes, Monarch and the two Australians, and for longer than was customary. And afterwards, the Lord Chamberlain came over to them, pressed through people to get to them, and he was saying excitedly, "What did he say? What did he say?" Meaning, what did the king say? And Matner told the Lord Chamberlain and the group who'd assembled around him and come with him, and he said, "I'm sick of this turnout. Let's go down to the corner pub and have a couple of beers." This is written by Donald Stewart, who was an Australian cadet, an officer cadet with my father at Corpus Christi College, Cambridge. My father was one of those officers who was brought back to go through an OPTU in England. And he, with Donald Stewart and others, were at Cambridge. And Donald Stewart, later killed, wrote, "Good character is its own sufficient defence. Win it, perfect it, and fear nothing. For character is the mightiest thing under God, in the universe. My friend, the Australian soldiers of World War I had character.
Well done.